You are listening to Cemetery Confessions, the world's #1 goth talk podcast.
Hello and welcome back to Cemetery Confessions. On this episode, we are continuing our special series of roundtable discussion episodes where we bring on a large group of thought-provoking guests for an in-depth conversation. This go-around, we've gathered individuals from all over the world to explore the relevance of goth culture among participants who have experienced the scene over several decades. This time, our esteemed panel includes former belly dancer Das, who you may know as the prolific goth YouTuber Gothic Soulflower. We also have Edward with us, who is an artist most well known for founding the 1978 LA band, which personally I still think defies classification, Nervous Gender. Furthermore, we welcome Hedvig, who is a German DJ, owner and designer at Elizabethan Ruffs, and a music journalist. And then to top it off, we are joined by Mel, who is an England-based bassist with the band Seventh Victim, a sales merchant for Sounded Out Records, and the official photographer and web designer for Skeletal Family. So thank you all for taking some time to join us today.
Thank you.
Hello.
Thank you.
Hello.
All right, well, to get going here, let's go around the, I guess, proverbial table and introduce ourselves. I would love to hear kind of the story of where you came from and how you were first exposed to alternative or goth culture. And then, of course, let us know where, what website or, social media account we can find your project or your band or your artistic work. So I believe we agreed we'd start with Das. So Das, take it away.
All right. Hello. Call me Das for short. My full name's Dacia, and people know me as Gothic Soulflower. I have a YouTube channel, which I have not been active on for the past 4 months. My apologies. But I also have an Instagram, which is also Gothic Soulflower. And I really just started out typical sheltered life in small town Texas. And, I started off loving new wave. I'm an 80s child. So I would listen to new wave. And when it started to get after midnight, since I'm a night owl, that's when I would hear the more dark sounds of Depeche Mode and more of the club sounds. And that's when I started liking the darker sounds and the swirly guitars. So all I had, I just had access to whatever was playing on the radio. My mom she's a sweet woman, but she was religious, and she had those music choices on lockdown. So whatever was playing on the radio, that's what I listened to. And it wasn't until I went to college, that's when I got into the goth subculture. A friend of mine, she worked at Tower Records, which was across the street from the college. So I met her there, and she said, "Oh, you look pretty cool, and maybe we can hang out, listen to music." And that's when she introduced me to goth, and I loved it ever since. And we went to clubs in the Atlanta area at the time, and that's where I started. And I graduated college and just started working, and then I started my YouTube channel and kind of went back into I've always liked goth. I went back into goth seriously before I started my YouTube channel and when I started belly dancing. So I'm basically just a listener and a fan of the subculture and try to participate where I can.
Very cool. Anywhere, you mentioned YouTube. So Gothic Soulflower on YouTube is where everyone can find you, right?
Correct.
Cool. And Instagram.
Yes.
Perfect. Who's next? Hedvig, would you like to tell us a little about yourself?
Yes, but first I would have to correct you. I'm not from Germany. I'm from Denmark.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
I don't know why, but a lot of people think I'm from Germany, but yeah, I'm from Denmark. Well, I'm Hedwig from Denmark, and I'm also called a Hedwig Funeral on Instagram and on my DJ site. I'm age 47 and I have 2 adult children. I first got into dressing up in 1982 when I discovered Boy George and Culture Club. And then it evolved to because I was a fan of the Blitz Kids too. So I used to dress up as Boy George in the early days.
It's fantastic.
Nice.
Yeah, with the hat and the hair and everything, you know. So, and then of course I discovered The Cure and Bauhaus, Susie, and so on. Yeah, and my style as well, it escalated, of course, into full-blown Blitz Kid looks and goth looks and all of that stuff. So, of course, back then it wasn't called goth, it was new wave.
Ah.
Yeah.
Right.
And also I'm a DJ on a goth web radio once a week, and I'm the owner and designer of Elizabethan Ruffs. I used to be a co-owner of a goth night event called Club der Dunkelheit. It's in German. And we had, because we didn't have any club nights in Denmark related to goth at all. So we decided to make our own club nights in Copenhagen. But it doesn't exist anymore. Although it became quite popular, but yeah, sometimes you just shouldn't mix business with friends. Yeah. So yeah, it doesn't exist anymore, but yeah, that's all really.
Very cool. Thank you.
Now I'm here.
Yay.
All right, Mel, have a go.
Well, I'm from the UK. I'm based in the northeast of the UK, near Newcastle upon Tyne. I got into the goth subculture. Well, I suppose if you rewind a little bit to the early 80s, I used to watch a lot of music programs like Top of the Pops and also The Tube, and I was like exposed to bands like Echo and the Bunnymen, Susie and the Banshees, and I remember seeing Bauhaus perform Ziggy Stardust on Top of the Pops, and it was like, wow. But it didn't really sort of kick in until about 1985 when I was 13. I don't know what it is about the age of 13. Everything just went black. And I remember seeing The Damned on a music program. I think they were singing Grimly Fiendish and Shadow of Love, and it was like, oh my God, Dave Vanian, you are hot.
Yeah.
And at 13, my hormones.
I agree.
At the age of 13, your hormones are going crazy, and that's how I sort of got into it. I reached out for the black hair dye, started wearing a lot of black clothes. I don't know, I suppose that I've always felt a little bit of an outsider in society. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, when I used to go to other children's parties, I used to feel really awkward. I don't know why.
Me too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I don't suppose you can say what was wrong with you, but you couldn't really sort of explain what it was. But now, as I'm a bit older, obviously you're more comfortable within yourself. But yeah, you were sort of looking back thinking, am I really odd? What's wrong with me? Why do I feel like this? Obviously, going through teens, I thought goth was a good way of expressing yourself. I didn't really see myself as a goth. I don't think anyone did in the sort of early to mid 80s, because it was like the alternative scene, which is the alternative to the mainstream.
Right.
I mean, back then girls were wearing pastel coloured clothes and perms and big shoulder pads, and that was not me. I mean, I started to listen to a lot of punk music. I mean, the original stuff from like 76, like the Pistols and the Clash and the Slates and the Damned. But when it got to sort of 80s punk music, I really didn't like it because it was too shouty and too aggressive and not very musical. Whereas the post-punk or positive punk stuff like Joy Division and Killing Joke and Susie and the Banshees, etc. They were very melodic, and I liked the way the songs were structured. So, you know, obviously I ran with that. So throughout school, I hated it. I liked doing art, but school itself, I got bullied a lot because I was the only goth in the school. And then I went to art college where I just met loads of like-minded people, you know, the indie kids and the goths and, you know, the crusties. And we all just used to hang around together and go out and get drunk. And it was brilliant. Then I moved to Leeds. And that was just like opening Pandora's box. It was like sort of the goth mecca in the UK. It's like where it all started with regards to the bands like the Sisters of Mercy. So there was a really good vibe there, and I absolutely loved it. I stayed there for about 7 years. I dropped out of the goth scene mid-90s because basically there wasn't a scene to be in anymore in the UK because it was all Britpop. And all the clubs that we used to go to were now catering for sort of Britpop. So I got into the motorcycle scene, and I was there for about 10 years. Obviously, I was still dressed in black, but all black leather. Nice. And my motorcycle was black. And I got back into it around about 2004 and sort of been stuck with it ever since. I'm in a band myself called The Seventh Victim. I'm the bass player. We've just released our second single, which is for download only, which you can find at sevenvictimbandcamp.com. I'm also a photographer. That was one thing that also got me to meet other alternative or goth people. Is I used to go up to people in the street and say, "Can I take your photograph? You look really interesting." And it was just a way of like sort of connecting with other people. And I've continued doing that, and I'm now, or I have been, an event photographer for the Goth Weekend at Whitby and various other sort of goth events in the UK over the last 10 years. And I've also done a lot of work with Skeletal Family, doing their website, doing their promo photos, doing their artwork. So it's been a real privilege to work with them.
Nice.
Beautiful. Thank you, Mel.
You're welcome.
All right, that brings us to Edward.
Hi, guys. I was born in 1957 in Dublin, Ireland, and emigrated to England in the 60s. And we moved to London originally and then to a small town called Luton. Then I emigrated from Luton to Los Angeles in the 70s. But when I got to Los Angeles in the 70s, I was a glam rocker. So platforms, silver jacket, and I thought I was both.
I am dying. Nice.
But I was living in like Glendale, California, which was like, they'd never seen a glam rocker before. So luckily I was so pretty, they didn't do anything to me. They just thought I was a girl. Then when punk rock started, it felt so comfortable for me. I went from glam rock to punk rock. But because I'd been into like music more like Eno, Roxy Music, German electronic music, the LA punk music was, the atmosphere was great, but the music sort of bored me. So I started a band called Nervous Gender, which had the aggression of punk rock, but also had a lot of sexuality from the gay community. So the subject matter had a lot to do with being bisexual and S&M and being Catholic, all very much combined together, but using synthesizers instead of guitars. So at that time it got called synth punk, which later got changed to electro clash, I think. I still do music. I also designed clothes in the 70s and 80s on Melrose at a store called Poser. We did punk clothing and some death rock clothing. That's what we were calling it death rock before it was called goth. Because death rock was a little bit harsher. And in some ways, goth for us at that time was like for posh people. So I now run a food pantry for the homeless here in Los Angeles, and I record under the name Nervous Gender Reloaded. And the last show we did was before the plague hit, was here in Los Angeles for a book that Mikey Bean put out about the LA goth scene. And that's about it.
Very fucking cool. Thank you all so much. Thank you all so much. All right, so I guess to kick off the focus of the discussion, we can kind of start with the experience today, maybe, and work ourselves backwards. The thing I was interested in hearing about is how you kind of negotiate adult spaces in today's society. Have you had difficulty finding work or just, going out day to day, doing things outside, apart from subcultural spaces? Do you find that you have a friend group that is outside of the scene that you still connect with? Or, what is that like as an adult living in modern society?
I've been through a lot of changes recently. It was, first of all, I'm really the only goth among my friends. There's some that are alternative, but my friends who got me into this subculture, we still connect on Facebook because everyone lives in a different state, not even in the same city. And that's one major thing that changed is there was a community. We didn't have to go to a club. We could just hang out at each other's houses, listen to punk and goth and other alternative music. There didn't need to be an event going on. But as I got older, and people get married, they have children, they have to work, and I'm still in Maryland, but I grew up closer to Washington, D.C. And the cost of living has just gone, it's ridiculous now. And people just simply cannot afford to stay here. So they had to make some moves. So I was working and taking belly dance classes and performing and doing my YouTube channel, really getting back into the scene. And then I got laid off. And before the coronavirus came around, I was doing stagehand work, which is self-employment. But I had to move out further away from the city. So I like living in the country, but it's kind of, I'm still a goth, but I feel myself kind of going away from the scene because I'm just not around anything. I don't really, the people I know who are in the scene live nowhere near me. And then things online and social media, be quite honest with you, I just needed a break. I got tired of it's great, but you have to deal with a lot of foolishness as well. And I was just like, okay, I'm going to take a break because I felt my creativity being stifled. I had to move. I just went through all sorts of changes. So I am currently, I'm kind of just laying low, like hiding in the shadows, like I said in Messenger. I follow people. I still listen to the music. The last concert I went to was Zymox back in November. So I went to that concert and I was like, yes, this is what I missed. This was awesome. But since I'm in the country, that had to be a trip. It wasn't just jumping on the train and going downtown like I'm used to doing. So that's the changes I'm going through now. Besides being older, I guess I'm a country mouse right now, which I love, but I'm starting to feel isolated. So that's my story right now.
I understand that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. There's a lot of questions I want to ask to follow up, but I think we'll get to those as we move on. So Hedvig, do you find people take you less seriously as an adult because of your music taste or your appearance or that kind of thing than when you were younger?
Yeah, actually a little bit, because it's mostly about appearance. Because I don't have any goth friends; they're all normies. We are not that many people in Denmark in general, and there are no goths here at all. And I live in a very small town on the West Coast. I'm the only one here. But other than that, I've never been told to grow up. But I know a lot of other goths has been told to grow up, which I don't really understand, because music has no age limit, or also looks does not have any age limit.
Right.
So, yeah. But other than that, I've never really had any problems with or difficulties with other mainstream people looking down at me or anything. I was a bit lucky in that way, I think. Or maybe people are afraid of me, I don't know. Yeah.
Is that different from when you were younger?
I don't really know. I think it's the same, actually, because I've never heard anyone say anything bad or negative towards me. I don't know why, actually. I was just extremely lucky, I think.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah.
All right, Mel, what about you?
Well, at the moment, I'm pretty lucky that I work in an environment where I can more or less dress as I want to. But I think with age, I just cannot be pestered, putting on the full goth clothing just to go to work. I just literally sort of fluff up my hair, put a bit of eyeliner on, lipstick, a band t-shirt and jeans and pointy boots and a leather jacket. But you know, I'm not going like sort of full sort of velvet dresses and corsets to work.
Who has the time?
That works.
exactly. And besides, I would imagine it'd be very comfortable sitting all day in a corset,
right,
sorting records out and dealing with customers. But yeah, I mean, I still have my hair coloured whatever colour I fancy doing it that week, and you know, my boss is pretty cool about it. Prior to that, I worked in at a local college as a web designer, and obviously they promote and encourage diversity. Again, I didn't go in like sort of full goth regalia, but they accepted me. I had tattoos. I had, you know, I've got my nose pierced. You know, I dressed in a lot of black. I had colour in my hair. That's fine. But I have had jobs where I have had to tone down, even though I wasn't customer facing. I think I worked for a call centre. So the customer wouldn't really see what I looked like, but they still had policies where you weren't allowed to have any like sort of facial piercings visible or tattoos visible, and you had to wear like sort of you know, I had a corporate look, like, you know, a plain shirt and some slacks or something. So you know, I've had to sort of adapt a little bit where I've worked, you know, in the workplace. But as I said, now it doesn't really matter, and that is good because I can actually be myself. I think way back when I was younger, when I was a teenager getting into the scene, it was very, very difficult because I was the only sort of alternative or goth person in the town I grew up, and I wasn't at an age to go to pubs or clubs with me being under 18. So I felt a little bit isolated, and I've mentioned previously that I did get a lot of bullying at school because of the way I dressed, but I just developed a thick skin and I just didn't retaliate, and they just got fed up and moved on to somebody else. So when I got to art college, I was 16 and, you know, met like-minded people, and we'd go out to clubs and pubs, and you had like a little network of like-minded people that were into similar music, you know, might not necessarily been into goth music, but they were into like sort of indie or alternative music at the time. You know, stuff like the Smiths, the Wedding Present, House of Love, the sort of dark indie stuff. And it was great, but obviously when college finished, everybody went back home to wherever they came from. So that little network of friends just disintegrated. And then I moved to Leeds, and then you get a whole bunch of new friends, and you know, friends that used to go out drinking or down at the clubs, and it was brilliant. But you get to an age where I think Daz mentioned that, you know, people get married and then, you know, they've got other responsibilities, so they kind of drop out the scene, and that kind of, I think that happens to everybody. So those like ourselves that have continued to be in the scene or dress goth and listen to goth, you kind of back being isolated again. And I think that's for me at the moment as well. I've moved back where I originally came from, and there isn't a big alternative scene here. There's like a handful of people that I know that are my friends, which are great to see, but there's absolutely no scene at all where I live. So again, you're sort of relying on social media and social networking to connect with people like yourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
So I live in Burbank, California, in Toluca Lake, a very, very conservative town. Actually, I am more extreme in my visual imagery in my 60s, and my wife is in her 70s, and she's more extreme than she was as a radical beatnik.
Oh, that's
So,
awesome.
Which is impressive.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
It gives me hope.
I mean, we make our own clothes.
Nice.
I have a pot of black dye on the patio that I dye constantly clothing. I wear it to work. I run a nonprofit pantry for the homeless. And I'm around a lot of religious peoples, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, Catholics, and I've been there 20 years. And as the years have gone on, the outfits have got wilder. And it's sort of like boiling a crab, even though I'm a vegetarian, but it's like boiling a lobster. They don't really notice it until they realize that you're wearing like an outfit for a black mass and it's Monday morning. And it's because there was a period of time where in my 30s, when I first got married, where we sort of tried to fit in the culture here in Burbank. And then when I start working, I thought, no, fuck it. They can, people already went on the internet and said, were you in a band called Nervous Gender? I'm like, yeah, I'm a legend. Yeah, I did that.
Yeah.
And so they sort of like, it's worked out amazingly well. I never thought, I thought that, as I got older, I would mellow out. I've got more outrageous. And I'm really enjoying it too.
Never conform.
No, it's I tried, and it's like your soul's being sucked out of you. It's like, this is just not me at all. I mean, it's just,
I tried it as well, because when my children were young, I tried to conform as well, but it didn't work.
Hedvig, did you try to conform because it was
I just thought it was easier,
easier, rather than people telling you, "Ooh, you can't dress
exactly,
like that."
From the school maybe, or the other children. But no,
and you probably didn't have the time to like sort of spend hours doing your hair and makeup. Exactly. You just went for slouchy goth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But of course now they're adults, so I can do whatever I want. And I do.
Yes.
But,
I think I found that, I mean, everybody has a variety of interests, but I think I've found that when I try to fit in more, I end up not having anything in common with the people I'm trying to talk to. And I don't want to talk about sports. Sorry.
Yeah, I feel like personally, part of the dress, I mean, we all know it's a music-based subculture, but you know right away when I'm all in black and I got my red dreadlocks piled high on my head, I mean, that's a signal that people talk to me anyway, but people aren't surprised when I'm not jiving with the same beliefs. Whereas when I had to dress conservative, it's just like I still didn't really fit in. I just looked like I fit in, which it's when you're just dealing with looks, it's shallow. It's there's nothing else there. Some folks don't want to. They just don't seem interested in going deeper. So if you don't like my look, you think I'm crazy or evil, people just don't talk to me. I'm cool with that, honestly.
Yeah. Well, it is shallow. It is the first impression we get, the first way we have of figuring out what's this person's deal, and that can help guide the interaction. So it does help when the appearance fits to guide the interaction.
I've just realized I didn't introduce the co-host Trey, and he's been here the whole time. I'm sorry, Trey.
Hi.
Trey is also, if you're not familiar, he is the co-host of the podcast, so he's hanging out as well.
Oh, okay.
Edward, I think you were trying to say something.
Yeah, I was saying that, having the general public reject you or give you attitude, even when you're old, it's not that doesn't bother me, because I can always channel my punk rock self and, go off. But it's family members that it's hard.
Yeah.
When, my parents and my brothers and sisters would tell me, "Oh, you're looking really great these days." And I would say, well, that's because I want to kill myself. And I look normal, and you're happy that I'm looking normal. And I'm only looking normal because I'm really depressed.
Yeah.
So, the weirder I look, the happier I am.
Yeah.
So you should be actually wishing
that is true.
I have a new outfit.
That's true for me as well.
Yeah. I know when people, I would wear, it would be nothing at work, especially. I would, I'd be like, let me wear this white dress and, just change it up a bit. People swear I was dressed up and ready to go on a date or something. Like, where are you going? It's like, nowhere. And then finally they would kick in. They would say, I know what it is. You're wearing white. So it's just interesting how other people get used to me wearing black, that if I wear a color, or especially white, even if it's the same style, even if it's just kind of plain, people think I'm dressed up for something. I just find that kind of humorous.
Yeah, sometimes I wear red to work, and they will say, "Oh, you're wearing a color." I said, "Blood red is acceptable in the costume."
Yes.
Then they don't ask anymore.
So on the flip side of this, then, with sort of the reactions you've had from outsiders to goth, and I suppose this depends on your involvement with the community in general, but what's your experience been with young kids who are just getting into goth, or people, that are mid-20s? What's their reaction to you? What is it like within the scene?
I think I've mostly had positive experience in the scene, with young people too. And it was when I first started, what was refreshing to me was, I'm not saying racism and sexism doesn't exist in the subculture. It does, but it's just, the people I was around in the goth, alternative scene, they just seem more aware. It's kind of like, well, if we're getting shit for just our clothing, and you're getting shit because of your skin color or your sexual orientation, well, that's fucked up, and we're not down with that at all. So that was really good for me, because you're surrounded, the normies will give you crap. It's always something. It's your sexual orientation that may be a problem, maybe your race, and maybe your height, and maybe just your face. It just seems like there is always an issue. Whereas when I got into the scene, people, I've never been around so many open-minded people in my life prior to that. And with the young people today, they seem to really like my dreadlocks, so that's cool. My main issue is really people my age who are normals. That's mainly who, they don't give me so much trouble now because I'm older and I really don't give a fuck. But they, it's time to grow up. Why are you? They're still on this. You look evil. Well, you worship Satan type of thing. It's like, y'all need to get off of that. I've been in this scene over 20 years. I'm not worshiping. I wasn't worshiping the devil then. I'm not worshiping the devil now. So my main beef has been people my age who are normies, to be honest with you.
Yeah, actually, I think people in our age group is worse than the younger goths in the subculture, because I feel like they're very positive towards us older goths. I think they're very sweet and also very embracing as well. I think I've never heard anything negative from the younger generation.
Yeah.
They're very welcoming, I think. Well, to me anyway.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think a lot of younger goths look up to people who have been in the scene for a long time as inspiration and validity, you know, for what they're doing. And I think that's different from a lot of other cultures.
I think the validity argument is a really good one too, because as we all have expressed multiple times, we've gotten that drumbeat of it's a phase. You're going to grow out of it. You're going to grow up eventually.
Right.
But as the young people who are in the midst of that as well, from their own family and potentially peer groups are going through it, they can look to the people also still in the scene in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and go, hey, these are people who managed to live a whole life still within this community, this scene. It's not something that I have to grow out of. It's not something that I have to force myself to quote unquote grow up and conform with the norms of society. So I think that's probably one of the best things that as elders in the community we can provide for those entering it and to help keep the whole society alive.
I think another point is, if I can jump in real quick, it also shows, I think young people are also seeing that not only have we been in the subculture for many years, but it's okay to step out of it for a little period of time and come back to it. I think there's the idea that you have to continue showing how goth you are and dressing up. And I think young people, well, at least I tell young people, it's like, yeah, I was still a goth. I just didn't look like one because of my job. And that's normal. That, you know, you're going to change throughout your life. It doesn't mean you're no longer into the scene. But sometimes you don't want to dress up, or you can't, or you have to wear a uniform, and that's okay. That's, you know, that's that's normal in life. You can dip in and out as far as showing your appearance of goth, because a number of us, I've talked to people, goths our ages as well, they've come back to the scene. They've been out of it for a while and they've come back, and that's cool. There's nothing wrong with that. So I think we're also showing people not only that you can still be goth many years later, but if you can't dress up, or if you have to take a break from it, or maybe you don't want to listen to goth music for a while, you want to try a different different music genre, that's okay too. I mean, we don't just listen to goth. I listen to all sorts of music, but
yeah, me too.
you know, that's okay. It's not, I think I'm hoping, from what I see, I think we're helping to, goth isn't really this rigid thing. If it's, for me anyway, if the music is there, that's all you need. All this other stuff is secondary, in my opinion. So that's how I feel. You know, we're still in the subculture. There are times where we couldn't go to clubs and couldn't really fully participate, but that's okay. That's just the way life goes.
Yeah. I think maybe we'll move on to music in a second here, but Mel, what's your experience been with your local scene, the online scene, and younger people that are involved?
It's been quite positive, especially with the sort of younger people in the sort of goth subculture. And to me, I think it's great seeing them, because you sort of see a little bit of yourself in them, thinking, you know what, I know exactly what you're going through. I know exactly you're trying to make your own scene out of what's already there. And I just think to myself, my God, you have got 40 years plus of music to catch up on. Yeah, I know, absolutely amazing. And the goth subculture is just so diverse, especially with the music, whether or not you sort of head off down the sort of cyber goth EBM music, or if you go down to the sort of traditional goth stuff, or if you want to go a little bit more pagan. There's the whole range of stuff, which, you know, at the end of the day, there's no right or wrong. It just how you feel. And I get the younger goth kids coming up to me going, oh my God, I'm so jealous of you. You've been to see all these cool bands that no longer exist. I mean, when I got into the scene, I think I discovered the Sisters of Mercy about 6 months after they originally split, and I was absolutely heartbroken, absolutely heartbroken.
Yeah.
But my husband, who's also a goth, and he's been into the scene a lot longer than I have because he's about 7 years older than me. He went to see bands like, well, he saw the original Sisters of Mercy, and he went to see bands like Dance Society. So I think he also went to see Japan as well in 1982.
Oh, I love Japan.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
and bands like Soft Cell. So yeah, when you get the younger kids coming up to you and you know sort of say, well, how old are you? And you tell them how old, and they say, no way, you don't look that. You look really cool. And in a way, it's quite nice because you're always being told by the media, especially mainstream media, regardless if you're goth or not, that when you get to a certain age, people stop looking at you because, you know, you're old or you're older, you know, you've no longer got youth on your side and everything is youth driven. But I don't think the younger kids see that. And I really, really embrace them, you know, getting into the subculture and making it their own as well.
I found that the dynamics is so different now than in the early days. Like in the 70s, you had to reject the past to be part of the current music. So if you were so you're a punk rocker, so then you hit all your Bowie albums and you said, oh, I was never glam rock. I was born punk, you know. But so when we start doing shows and we expected to get a lot of shit from the young people, and the actual opposite happened. And we were like, why are they being so nice? Are they setting us up for something? And we realized that they didn't have that thing where they felt like they had to reject everything. They just wanted, they treated us so well. We were truly shocked. And when we did the last show we did, you know, people would come up to us who were obviously only like 23 and 24. And the information that they had about everybody, what had gone on, was beyond what I could remember. They were so sweet and so gentle. I was really taken back, and it encouraged me to say, well, now I think I could, even as an old man, fit in this scene without feeling like, am I the lech in the corner? Not the person, you know. Yeah, I absolutely adored, especially the here in LA, we have like a large contingency of Latino death rockers.
Yeah.
And they're just spectacular, about their imagery and their enthusiasm. And they really do see it as a movement and not just a trend.
They seem to be very authentic about the way they look.
Yes, definitely.
So music then, I think most of us and most goths would agree that like music is the core, and then you kind of move out from there, right? So we talked about fashion a bit.
Yeah.
When it comes to music, and obviously, you know, fashion is related to music in a lot of ways, but the bands that you were listening to in the 80s and the 90s, when we talk about those same bands now and the new music that's coming out, do you feel like you're still able to relate to and express your emotions and your life experience and how you feel through goth music, or has that kind of changed as you've accumulated experience throughout life?
As far as the music goes, that has kept me into the subculture, because I'm discovering, you know, because I have my staple bands that I listen to, but then you branch out and there's just so many new bands and just so much good music. It's like, okay, this is wonderful. It really is growing, and we have 40 years, like someone else said, 40 years of music going on. I feel more, I think what's alienating me, and it's really no one's fault, it's just what's going on. It's, for me, it's the lack of community in real life. Because when you get on social media, especially, it's a very visual medium, and you try not to compare yourself, but you can't help but to. You could always be more outrageous, and you could just be dressed to the nines, and that's great. But
My skin doesn't look like all these Instagram filtered photos, you know.
Right. Can we talk about man, there's some face tuning going on. Oh, you look so good for your age. I don't say anything. It's like, I have no proof. But I'm just like, there's no lines, no wrinkles. Yeah, okay. Someone's been face tuning, which is their prerogative. But it's things like that I'm kind of, when it's not the music and it's not just the clothes, it's just, I can't really explain it really. I just feel, because I don't want to be on social media all the time. I don't want to be on the internet all the time. And that's how I've kind of changed. The music's still there, but I'm not at a place right now where I can go to concerts and shows. So all I'm kind of left with is whatever on the internet. And it leaves me wanting sometimes.
Yeah.
I don't know. Did I answer your question?
Not really, but that's fine. That's fine.
Sorry.
Hey, we're just sitting around telling stories. It's totally fine.
I forgot the question actually.
Yeah, so more. That's fine. We don't have to stick to.
No,
that's fine. I was just asking more about your relationship with music. You know, as a young, at least for me, as a young person, music was really important to express myself and feel connected to something.
Oh yeah.
Has goth music, has that changed as you've gotten older, or are you still finding it?
I find it to be the same, I think. As of right now, there's a lot of new goth music coming out, so that's good. But yeah, finally, because for a long time there were not that much goth music out there. But yeah, I feel it's a good time to be goth right now, music-wise, of course. Yeah, and yes, I do feel the same as I did in the 80s. I do feel I can express myself through the new music as well. Yeah, that's good, I think.
Good. Yeah.
Okay, I agree with Hedvig. Since I didn't answer the question, that's my answer.
What about you, Mel? You're making music currently.
I am making music, and I am still listening to music. Very similar to Hedvig there. I've also DJ'd, and I just love discovering new music. The older stuff, the good old what you classes like 80s trad goth stuff, I still love it. I still listen to it. But for some strange reason, those bands from the 80s for me that are still around haven't really followed me through the 90s and the noughties and beyond. I don't know why. I don't know. I just don't think their music sort of resonates with me anymore. It's the newer stuff that excites me. Bands like Sex Style and Actors, Boy Harsher. There's an Italian band called Soviet. There's another band called the Pleasure Symbols from Australia. There's sort of a shoegazy band called Echo Ladies from Sweden, and I'm absolutely loving it. Sadly, there doesn't seem to be much coming from the UK with regards to new alternative goth bands. If there are any new bands out there, they've only got a very small following, and we don't seem to get discovered. Luckily, there is sort of a small network of promoters that do put the gigs on. But sadly, the turnouts are really sad. I really don't understand what is going on. So that's why I turned, to looking at bands that are coming from the US and bands that are coming from Europe, which are very, very, very similar to the bands that came out in the 80s, the purity of them. Not necessarily wanting to sound like them, but, they've got that aesthetic feeling about them. I mean, there was a band from San Francisco called In Letter Form, and I absolutely fell in love with them. And they had that same sort of vibe as Joy Division without wanting to sound like Joy Division. They had that authenticity, which is what I love.
Well, I'm still making music.
Good.
and it's still very similar to what I did in the 70s and 80s, except it's done better. It's, I mean, more professional sounding, but it's still the same. It's more avant-garde synth punk than it is traditional, songs.
Yeah.
But when we did Reform, I found that people who did more like traditional punk music or death rock music were able to appreciate that too. And I felt the same way with them. Now, I get a lot of my information just from the internet too. And so periodically, I mean, I find music I really like that everybody else has found many years ago. I've just found them. And one was like, I think they were called She Faded Away or She Died. And it was sort of like,
away.
yeah, they were sort of gothic, and I think they sang in Arabic.
I think they're from Turkey.
She passed away.
Yeah, I
Turkey.
think
Turkey,
she
yeah.
passed
Yeah.
away. I think
Yeah.
that's it. Yeah, that's a
And
good
that
band.
made me like feel like I was 18 again, going, "Oh my God, what else have they put out? I want to follow
Yeah.
them to the ends of the earth." But it was based upon just hearing them and not being part of a scene. So sometimes, when your friends have bands and you're in a band, you support each other. But
Yeah.
you may not particularly have bought the albums before. So I find myself listening to music based upon the music more than do I know them. And so I appreciate the internet for that aspect of it. Now,
Yeah.
I'm just down the road from Hollywood and stuff, and so they have a lot of bands performing.
Mhm.
But, I get up at 5 a.m. So by the time 10 o'clock comes at night, I do feel my age.
Me too. Yeah, I saw She Passed Away at VGT. They were so good. So very good.
Actually, I missed She Passed Away because of my age, I think, where they had a show scheduled for a certain time and then their flight was canceled, so they had to drive, and it took them so the show was delayed maybe 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was a similar thing. I have to get up for work in the morning. I can't make this. I can't do it. I can't get 4 hours of sleep and then go work a full day.
Right.
No.
Not anymore, no.
Not anymore. Oh, those days are over. Sleeping for 2 hours, getting right back up, or not sleeping at all. Oh, I was like, I could do this. No. If I do manage to stay up all night, I look it. Trust me.
Yeah, gone are the days where I'm able to sort of party continuously or go to gigs continuously 4 days on the trot. I can't do it anymore.
No.
Whenever I go to the Goth weekend at Whitby, I mean that's like, but when they say it's a weekend, it's not. It doesn't start Friday and Saturday and end Sunday. People actually turn up Wednesday and go home the following Tuesday. So there's always something happening, and honestly, it just exhausts me. And usually on the first night, I just go for it and get really drunk, and then I pay the price the next day.
Yeah.
And it kind of ruins the rest of my weekend.
Yeah.
I wish I hadn't done that, but once upon a time, I was able to.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I think as far as the music as a whole and why I have gravitated to it in the first place, I think some of those reasons have to do with why it seems to maintain its relevance as well. So sonically, I mean, goth music grabs from so many different eras of music, between classical and folk and punk and rock and electronic styles. So it's not really pigeonholed sonically into one era, like something like a pure on, new wave, early 80s electronica sound. It's got elements of that, but it grabs some other ones. So it still stays relevant sonically and can still innovate. And then thematically, lyrically, when you're talking about the topics it discusses and the ideas it presents, tend to be those bigger, existential, non-age, life stage specific topics that are discussed. So something is still relevant, even if it may have grabbed you as a teen or as a young adult, but it still can grab you as an adult because we're still struggling with these big questions. It's not just about, woes of dating or the workaday world, starting your first job.
Being horny for ghosts. Sorry.
Exactly. And that's universal. Everybody has that throughout their entire life. We never get over our horniness around ghosts.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, those sort of universals and the lack of a sonic template that is rooted in a single time frame allows it to stay relevant through the years.
No, I was just thinking about festivals because you brought up Whitby, and I remember when I was younger, whenever I went to some kind of fest event, I was sleeping outside. I was like passing out in squats or like, just couch hopping. And now if I go to a festival, I want a shower, I want air
Me
conditioning,
too.
I need to change my shoes because my
Well,
feet hurt.
But
yeah, well,
that's
I
go
was going to
ahead.
say the Goth weekend at Whitby, it is actually quite civilized because the majority of people that go there either go in a bed and breakfast or they book a cottage or some apartment to stay in. So obviously we've got access to things like electricity to to plug the crimpers in,
Yeah.
which is essential.
Very
So
important.
yeah, there's no camping or anything like that. It is actually very civilized, and it is actually quite nice to go back after a night dancing to your own bed or someone else's even,
Ooh,
and like
yes.
rest your feet. It's marvelous.
Yes. I I- it's cool that we did all that, get it out of here. This is why I tell young people, have fun, go to clubs. If you want to get drunk and stay up all night, get it out of your system, because when you get older, not saying you won't want to do it, it's just your body will say, no ma'am, we can't do this anymore.
Oh, yeah, I know.
So yeah, I think it helps me personally just to come to terms with my age. I got all my system. I know my limits. I partied, I stayed up, I didn't sleep. It was fun. And now it's just time to act. That's what I call acting my age. Where my body's like, you are tired, you need to go to bed. Okay. Good
Drink
Yeah,
some
and
night.
water.
that second wind doesn't happen, does it? You don't get a
Nope.
second chance. No, that's it. I'm asleep.
Exactly.
No, we can't start all talking about our operations.
Oops.
There's one part of the whole thing that makes me sort of sad in some ways is that there was some people within the early goth scene, death rock scene, that didn't make it through the 80s. And I see that I just so wished that they some of them committed suicide, some of them died heroin overdose, some got AIDS, and
Yeah.
they there was a certain depression that came in here in Los Angeles, especially during that period in the 80s, late 80s, where they felt like what they did as artists were no longer wanted or accepted, or it was old hat. And, and now I see if these people had been able to live long enough, that the interest in their art would be back again.
Yeah.
And that the depression would have lifted.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a
That's
wonderful
true.
thing is hindsight.
Yeah.
I think that's expressed really well in you mentioned Mikey Bean's book earlier, but it does kind of go through that. The frenetic kind of early excitement, and then, the consequences of what was going on after that and dealing with that. I think that story is told really well in that book. So we're all kind of talking around community, and Das, I noticed that you mentioned early on that you, to some extent, self-imposed, but feel like you have become isolated. I'm curious to hear, why that may be, and if, it has the importance of going out to clubs and events and talking with people. Has that changed over time, or, have you, has your friend group from the early days, like, have you been able to maintain that? Like, why is it, do you feel like, or if you haven't, become more isolated?
I think I'm just more isolated because of just events that happened. It started with being laid off, to be honest with you, and I'm talking about a regular full-time job from a regular full-time job to a gig, and that means money was tight. So I had to, and then we moved out to the country because it's cheaper. And the person that owned the house that we were renting closer to the city, well, they decided to get a divorce, so and sell the house. So that means we had to be out of there. But a lot of the isolation, it's not terrible all the time. I'm kind of I feel like I'm resetting myself. I'm just slowing down. I'm trying to figure out what I want to do as far as art, as far as dance, and as far as video. and I was just kind of all over the place, working full time and, hanging out, going to clubs, going to dance performances. And now I'm kind of in a reflective period right now, and just trying to figure out what to do as far as my creativity. So my isolation, that's where it started, and that's where I'm ending up now. And it can be a problem sometimes, but it's not a bad thing. I kind of like being away from the city for a while. I don't know what the future holds. So there's good parts of it. Sometimes I just don't want to be around a lot of people, but I'm away from a lot of stuff. So that's the downside. So I'm just taking advantage of this isolation to try to figure out what the hell I want to do. Again, what do I want to do in my life? So did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yay. Kind of ramble sometimes.
That's all right. That's all right. Yeah. So Hedvig, what do you think about that? Is clubbing as important to you as it used to be? Do you feel the need to have a close community of people, or has that changed?
Well, we don't have any goth events in Denmark at all. We only have mainstream clubs here where I live on. Yeah, but I still go out to mainstream clubs here, and no one ever says anything negative to me. That's amazing, actually, because when I go out, I really stack on a lot of makeup and hair and everything. But yeah. So we only have mainstream clubs.
Yeah.
So in a way, I think all goths are a bit isolated because we are not that many. And there's always always just one or two of very small group in every goths community. There are not many goths at all. So yeah.
Do you feel like the internet has been a really useful tool for you, or do you not really like the community online?
I do actually have quite a bit of followers, but yeah.
It's different from close friends, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I do have close friends also from the 80s still. Although she's not goth, but she attended VGT with me in 2018. And all of the other friends that I had from the 80s, I don't know what happened. They just decided to disappear. But in a way, we're all isolated. So I think it's a good thing that we have social media, of course. Yeah, that's the only way we can really communicate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you, Mel?
Here in the UK, I do feel there is a dip in the goth community outside of social media with regards to like physical venues and club nights. It's probably fine if you live, say, in London, where you've still got the opportunity to like go out and see a lot of bands or meet up with your friends, or go to a goth club with them. But not so much sort of in the rest of the UK. Whenever I go to a gig, I have to travel, usually about an hour and a half away from where I live, and obviously work commitments. You've got to sort of try and get the afternoon off work in order to get ready to go out, etc. So I think it's in a little bit of a dip at the moment. I mean, I tend to go to Leeds a lot, which is about an hour and a half car drive away from where I live. Once a month, there's a club night called Carpe Noctem, and that's been running for about 20 years. But the clientele is similar age to myself, and occasionally you might get a group under 30, but not very often. I mean, so social media is brilliant to sort of network and connect with other people, but I do like the physical contact. I like to go down to my local bar or my local pub for a chat with a group of friends, but I think due to my age and the way people's lives have turned out differently, or they've moved away, that kind of thing doesn't happen. So yeah, I do feel a little bit isolated, and similar to what Darcia said, is I'm quite comfortable with it. I'm quite comfortable in my house with my husband, listening to goth music and
Yeah.
and playing and cuddling with the cats and
Yes.
and I don't know, just being creative, locked away in my little home studio making music. I don't feel I have the need to go out, but sometimes I do miss it, and it's sad that it's not always there like it used to be in my 20s.
Mhm.
And Edward, sounds like you've got a pretty well built up community just around where you live, but what about in scene participation?
Yeah, besides, when actually I was very late coming into the whole internet thing. In fact, I hated it at first. And when my wife brought first computer home, I had just got rid of the television. And I said, okay, that one needs to go in the garage with the other Satan. I don't want any of that shit in my house. And then about 5 days later, I went on the internet. And I'm like, oh my God, this is fucking amazing. I fell in love, And she's like, my wife's like, oh, I knew you would. But at the time, I had dropped out of the cult of everything. And me and Corinne were out here in Burbank, and I didn't work. I spent my days gardening, cooking food, and making clothes, but I was not part of anything, any music scene, nothing. And I sort of had to recover from what had happened prior in the early 80s in many ways. Mm-hmm. So about 10 years, I was dropped out. People thought I was dead. And I sort of wanted them to think that. I did not want to interact anymore. But then when the internet came, when I got the computer, and I'm like, oh, and I start seeing that what I had been involved in wasn't some stupid, dismissed bullshit, which the general message you got from people that, goth or punk or the alternative world wasn't worth anything. And I saw that the young people were interested in it again. It inspired me, re-inspired me. Sure. And so, I got a lot going on the internet, and none of it is about promoting and getting, more money or, stardom, right. But just the interaction in itself feeds your soul, and so with Corinne was like a beatnik, a radical hippie here in the LA in the 60s. I was a goth, and I was glam rocker / punk rocker, synth punker. So our life basically has all of those aspects of all the subcultures in it. So like this morning, we had breakfast on the patio, and we're playing Hindu chants while dressed in black. So we sort of ended
my kind of morning.
we sort of put it all together, not rejected any part of our life, and said it was all worthwhile and it all has value.
Yeah. I think that's key as well. I see some young people trying to put everything into its own separate box, and I think embracing that you can be multiple things at the same time is really important. Kind of leveraging your experience in a different way, I wanted to kind of ask what your perspective has been on goth over the years, and I think we can kind of start with something I see come up a lot, which is whether or not goth is countercultural, and if it still is, or if that's kind of the focus on that has shifted and it's become more middle class or more commercial or that kind of thing, and whether or not it still has that subversive, transgressive power. So, Das, what do you think about that?
Has it gone commercial? I don't know if it's gone. I wouldn't say it's gone mainstream. I just think it's more. More people know about it because of the internet. They see, these dark clad, heavily made up folks like, oh, what's going on? Whereas before the internet, they saw that and they didn't really want to get to know what was going on. They were repulsed by that. So I don't know if it's gone more commercial, maybe more popular. More popular if you're young. I see. I can't really. I just think it's gotten more popular because of the internet. That's what I think. As far as commercial, a little bit. I mean, you can get goth clothes off the internet as well. Whereas most of us back in the day went thrifting or made our own clothes, and many of us still do that. There's more options now, I think. So I don't know. I don't see it as being more commercial, just more popular because it's more visual.
Right.
People see goths more without even knowing what about the music. Some people just think it's a fashion thing. And that's because of social media. So more popular, I don't know about more commercial. That's how I feel.
I would say maybe commercial in a fashion sense.
Yeah. Okay.
And visuals, appearance, I think, but not exactly the music, I think, but
right.
Yeah, I wouldn't say commercial, like you said, more popular. Yeah, but it's mostly focused on visuals, I think, because of social media, of course. But...
Right.
What about you, Mel? Was when you were younger, was goth used to be transgressive and fight the power and all that? And has that changed for you, or?
Never been politically motivated. I try not to let my music and my politics mix. But I don't know. But back in the 80s, me, it was just about self-expression. I mean, we lived during Margaret Thatcher's government and basically privatized everything, and I don't know. I don't know. I suppose we just sort of rebelled and reacted against the norm. But obviously, as you grow older, you tend to get a little bit more complacent. But with regards to sort of is goth commercial, again, it's going to be down to the visuals, like both what Darcia and Hedvig said. I think that's to do with mainstream fashion sort of saying, well, this autumn we're going to go for the goth look, and before you know it, all the high street shops have got some really nice gothic looking clothes. And you think, right, well, I'm going to buy those, put them away until they're not in fashion anymore, and then I can wear them. So I mean, that's
exactly my thoughts as well.
Yeah, I mean, also as well, like what Darcia said is that you can buy goth clothes on the internet, but back then, what we were doing, we'd go to high street shops and buy anything that was black, or we'd dye it black, or we'd go to the sort of secondhand or thrift shops looking for slightly sort of quirky clothes. I mean, it didn't all have to be black, but you'd be able to pick up a frilly shirt or something like that in a thrift shop. The only thing that I'm pretty miffed about at the moment, I'm a bit upset about goth clothing being available on the internet, is the lack of winkle pickers.
Yes.
I mean, I did wear like new rock boots for a little while, but due to a knee complication, I can't really wear anything really heavy or bulky on my feet. But I just love my winkle pickers. There used to be a couple of companies selling winkle pickers not so long ago, but I think they've gone bust.
Yeah, because I got a couple pairs from a couple shops, and then when I looked back, there was like this whole drama, like, oh, I didn't get my shoes or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, oh, okay.
I didn't get my shoes. I paid for them, but they never returned. Yeah.
Oh, no. was that what were the Gothic Pike or something, or were the Gothic shoe company?
It was Goth Pikes because the other one, why can't I remember?
There's the underground
the Gothic shoe company, of course.
Yes,
they were closed down, so there were only Goth Pikes left. So I thought, okay, let me try some from Goth Pikes. but they never returned my money because they sent me the wrong ones. So I had to send them back, and they never gave me any money back or
Oh
anything.
no,
So
I know.
That's
no,
so
I'm not
sad.
doing that again.
Oh
But yeah,
man.
going back to whether or not sort of goth is commercial or counterculture. Music wise, I don't think it's ever going to be commercial. I mean, I'm sorry if I keep referring back to the 80s.
Oh no.
But bands that try to make it commercially, bands like the Sisters of Mercy, The Mission,
Right.
Fields of the Nephilim, you had the March Violets and also Skeletal Family. They tried to make it mainstream, but that they didn't make it in a way. I mean, bands like the Cult, they changed direction in their music. They went from sort of post-punk alternative goth with Love Album to Electric, which was just straight down the middle rock. And obviously they've made a success of that. So I think the music is still very much underground or alternative, and it's certainly not mainstream. I mean, I suppose we're going to get into this debate: what is goth and what is not goth musically. But I've never seen Marilyn Manson goth.
Right.
He's got the goth visuals, but musically, no. His music is sort of very sort of quite hard edge, very rocky, very sort of verging on sort of death metal sort of feel. There's
Yeah,
a
sort of
lot
like
of
a shock rock type of
yeah,
thing.
yeah, exactly. So I mean, yeah, great on him because he's made a success of it. But with regards to, as I said, the other bands I've mentioned, no, they're still going to be and always will remain like sort of alternative or underground, so to speak. And I think it's more underground now. Mainly because
Yes,
the way the way the music industry is run now.
yeah.
Music record labels aren't willing to like sort of risk putting money into up and coming bands, especially from the alternative side. So that's why they seem to do it themselves, which is great, and it's a great punk ethic as well.
Right.
But yeah, I kind of like it as it is, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, I think the problem with it's a dilemma. When something hits mainstream, it's like, great, it's easier to get their music. It's, it's more people are liking it. But the problem is shooting for mainstream, regardless of your genre, you have to appeal to so many people. And not everyone is down with the subversive lyrics and the instrumentation. I feel this way with hip hop. Hip hop was banging back in the 80s, early 90s, but as it got commercial, it just starts to get watered down because you have to appeal to so many more people. So I'm with Mel. I'd rather it not be mainstream and keep it purity versus watering it down to appeal to more people.
It does suck listening to Ian Astbury go from Southern Death Cult to the Cult. That's not a good discography there. But Edward, obviously, Nervous Gender is and has been incredibly transgressive. Do you feel like that aspect of goth or alternative culture is still part of the scene?
Yeah, I wouldn't say yes until only because of doing our own shows and having young bands open for us and talking to them. But looking at the media, like through television or even through fashion, I'm not a really good one to talk about goth, because as far as I got, goth was like, I worshipped Virgin Prunes. Yeah. I worshipped them as a to me, it was a religion. It wasn't just music. They were expressing the ugliness of Catholicism and coming from Ireland, all the hideousness that we, as young boys, we had to go through. So my idea about music wasn't about entertainment. It wasn't about, oh, that's a lovely song. And it was more like, oh, that makes me really feel sick. That makes me really feel upset. I want that record, because it represented my internal mind. In the same way with clothing, I mean, I was making a lot of what we call goth clothing in the 80s and trying to sell them. And I couldn't get a buyer. I mean, not a buyer in terms of making enough money to pay the rent.
Right.
So it was amazing to see, like 10, 15 years ago when I went online and I saw like Rick Owen and people like that doing goth sort of clothing and getting $300 for a t-shirt. So a lot of the commercial aspect of what has been taken from goth just confuses me. And that's sort of why I've always tried to work and make my own money, so that when it came to doing music and came to doing clothing, I didn't have to listen to anybody. It didn't pay my rent. It didn't feed me, because I felt that when you start to depend upon the money from your art, you end up in a vicarious situation where you have to like calm it down or change it in some way at the hope that, you know, you will make money.
Mm. So there is some compromise that we may have to go through.
Yeah, and I wasn't willing to do that. So that's why I worked a regular job from 5 a.m. to 6 p.m.
Sure.
And that money looks after me and my wife and 7 kids. So, you know.
Wow.
7 kids.
Yeah.
Oh,
Ooh,
wow.
Goth Papa over here. That's the ultimate. That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, it would be nice to have. It was just that the time when I was making clothes and doing stuff like that, people weren't interested. People dressed up for, shows, but on a daily out on the street, especially in suburbia here in California, you took your life in danger when you went out on the street looking goth or looking punk rock. I mean, there's a real ignorant redneck element to this culture here in California that people don't understand. And that's in some ways why a lot of the early punks had to basically leave the punk scene and create the death rock scene, because all the white supremacists and all of the jocks from suburbia had taken over the scene. And
I think that you probably find, Edward, that's quite similar to most of the punk scene in that time all over the world. It was terrible.
Yeah. I mean, it's sad because I have to remind and it's not their fault, they're young, but skinhead is now associated with neo-Nazi, but they didn't start off neo-Nazi. They had taken, it got, y'all know this, they got so bad that the original skinheads had to call themselves sharps, because it's like, no, this is not what skinheads are supposed to be. But neo-Nazis, appropriated it, and now when you say skinhead, the first thing people think is a neo-Nazi instead of the Well,
I like to say, I was living in Luton in England when the skinhead movement first started, and I was a glam rocker, and I said, even in my platforms, they couldn't catch me. So at that point in time, there was not a neo-Nazi element to it at all. Right. It was years later when I was living in Walthamstow, and the National Front moved in down the road from me, that I started to see that element. But here in Los Angeles, in Orange County and outside of Hollywood area, the white supremacists really zeroed in on the skinheads and started like priming them, to make it so. And it wasn't just anti-black; it was anti-everything.
Yeah,
anti-gay, anti-Hollywood, anti-everything.
Since you brought it up,
I don't know if that answered it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And actually, you got me thinking. I don't know why I didn't include this, but since we have some parents here, I should maybe ask, how the dynamic of you being alternative was throughout your kid's life, and if that, how they felt about it. Did that impact their social group, like their friends and their friends' parents?
I have grandchildren now, and
okay.
My youngest grandchild is like 12. And so I have biracial grandchildren of both Latino and African American descent. So we're a motley crew when we go out, because we're like the Addams family in some ways. And I find that my young grandchildren absolutely adore us, absolutely like what is Papa going to wear to the party? They're just like, and then, they don't quite understand a lot of it. So sometimes they'll say things like, so do you know Justin Bieber? No, that's not the same kind of music, but they just see very outlandish clothes, or they see a microphone in the house, and they've created this scenario in their head that grandma and grandpa are just these elaborate, wonderful people. Now the children weren't that. The original children, my stepchildren, were a little bit more, oh my God, what are they going to wear? The grandchildren, as the years, they're the ones that have embraced it. I mean, they all want to be artists now. They don't want to be goth, and they don't, but they do want to. They do think differently because of what they see. Because when they first were born, and my daughter had to work, so we had them in the house as babies, and so they lived in an environment that had statues of Kali, and played, soft cell through the speakers. So they have it's changed them, and I absolutely love it.
Wonderful. So what do I want to take us out with? Let's do this, because this comes up fairly often on the show, and the idea, or in general, how to think about the 80s and 90s. People go back and forth about, the 80s are the only thing that matters, or the 90s are the only thing that matters, and everything after that is trash. How do you feel about those decades? Do you have a lot of nostalgia for them? Do you care more about looking towards the future? That kind of stuff.
I have a lot of nostalgia for it. I was a child of the 80s, so I have nostalgia there, but I also have nostalgia as far as goth from the 90s. That's when I got into the scene. So the 90s and early noughts, I do have fond memories, and I do go back to the nostalgia of it all. But I want to be careful that it's one thing to be nostalgic, but I'm not trying to put myself in a position that I'm wishing for the past. Because nostalgia, the whole thing with nostalgia, you're only remembering the good times. I'm not remembering the crap that I went through. So I have fond memories of that. And it's just more about, it's okay to be nostalgic. I'm very nostalgic, but I'm also, I'm still alive, and I'm still relatively young, even though I'm older. And it's just, I'm nostalgic, but I'm also looking forward to the future and just figuring out just how to be my creative self out here in the middle of the country. So that's where I'm at.
Well, my favorite decade is the 80s, for sure. But I try not to limit myself only to 80s or 90s. Mm-hmm. I just like all kinds of, all of the decades, also the new stuff, of course. But yeah, golden age of goth is for me the 80s. But again, I'm not limiting myself to only the 80s.
Right.
Yeah.
Mel, what are your thoughts?
Very, very similar to Hedvig's there. I mean, I loved the 80s. I loved growing up in it. Not only the music, but also there was the sense of freedom. I think there was a lot more freedom back there, as opposed to now. I mean, obviously we're in, lockdown restrictions because of COVID-19, which isn't fun at the moment. Back then in the 80s, the music, I don't know, I just felt more optimistic. I don't know, because as I get older, I get a little bit more bitter and cynical about life. I don't know. But the 90s, I was in a totally wilderness place, music-wise, because I just caught the end of what people call the golden age of goth, which is probably from like sort of 79 to 89. Yeah. And I was able to go to nightclubs and experience, the scene as it is, where there was a whole mishmash of like sort of, punks and goths and post-punks all together. And then when the 90s came, it was very flouncy. And a lot of bands, especially in the UK, were trying to mimic what had already been there. They're all wanting to sound like the Sisters of Mercy or the Fields of the Nephilim. And I just found that a little bit boring. But similar to what Hedvig said, yeah, I look forward to the future of the subculture and especially the music, because to me the music is a happy place for me in my head. I just love discovering new bands and trying to see them live and meet other people that are into it, and I hope it's going to continue, because I'm surprised it's continued this long, to be honest, but I suppose it has evolved in certain aspects, with regards to the various fashions that come and go. You've got the Lolita look, goth look, and then you've got the sort of grufty goth look and the death rock goth look. So it's interesting times ahead, and I hope it does continue. Obviously we're not going to live forever, even though we think we might do. But yeah, we'll see what happens. But yeah, I'm pretty optimistic about it all.
Still waiting on that mysterious stranger who turns out to be a vampire. Who knows?
There's a few there's a few I know that think they are, but
I think, starting in like 1977 was when I first got involved with the punk scene, and maybe out to 1985. For me, it was like a religious experience. I felt like I had found a movement. Instead of reading about Dadaism or reading about an art movement that I missed in the 30s, I had one right in my hands, and just doing flyers and making my own clothes and buying a synthesizer and screaming at people. It was extremely exciting. It was it was a religious experience for me. I mean, I'd been in a Hindu cult before that, and it was better than that. The rituals were wonderful. Now, by '85, in my world, the heroin had taken over Los Angeles in the goth scene, and AIDS had started to take over too. So that was a very sad time. And just the fact that I did not expect to live, I did not expect to make it to be 30, and I didn't think any of my friends would. But luckily, that for quite a group of us, it didn't happen. We lived, and we've gone through it. And seeing young people still excited about the imagery and the music is inspiring. It's very inspiring, because the message we got in the late 70s and 80s was that what we saw as important was pointless, was unworthy. And then to see, even my parents are now gone, but by the time they were in their 70s, like, oh, sure, Jesus, you were right about it all. I thought you were a weirdo altogether. But no, you're right. Everybody's doing it now. So I'm just grateful. I am grateful to be alive, at 64 now. And the fact that we're even doing this conversation, it could very simply be that nobody's interested. Nobody cares. It could have died a death of boredom and uninterest. But no, it hasn't. It still has meaning for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's certainly a subculture that remains undead. It goes to sleep for a little while, but there are the sort of few hardcore goths that are still keeping it going. Then all of a sudden, there's a massive resurgence again.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I did want to leave a little time in case there was any stories you wanted to tell, or any questions or topics that I didn't bring up that we could chat about, in case I looked over something.
I'm just jazzed that, I started in the goth scene in Atlanta, and here I am talking to people from Ireland and the UK and Denmark and Chicago. That's really, no matter what the BS, just some people are less like, the internet and social media is just evil and terrible. You really have to make it, you have to remember just to control you're in control of the media. So, you know, this was not possible in the 90s.
No.
Wasn't possible in the 80s. You know, I read about people like you folks and like zines and other printed media, but talking to y'all, this has been, I've enjoyed it. And it's kind of just, you get out of goth a little bit and you get in your head a little bit, and then you talk to people who are in the scene and have been in the scene for many years. And I found all y'all stories fascinating. So,
But yeah, again, we're all very, very similar.
mm-hmm.
Our stories have all been similar. You know, you know, you've got you guys in America. We've got Hedvig in Denmark, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just that we've all sort of experienced similar things, which I suppose connects us.
Mm-hmm.
Strange
it really
how that works.
does.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really does.
Especially when we first got into the scene, that, you know, we especially the sort of the younger ones amongst us, we thought we were the only ones. We were just the
Yeah.
only weirdo kid in the school, but we're not. We've realised that we've all experienced that.
And I knew that. I even knew that, and then it was one of those things. It's like, I know I'm not the only. I'm Black, so it's like, I know I'm not the only Black woman into this scene, but in Atlanta, I was one of the few. So it's one of those things that you knew it's not possible to be the only one. There's too many people. It's just you didn't meet them and see them face to face. Whereas now on the internet,
I do know, like, sort of people of color in generally, but especially in the UK, there's very few and far between.
Mm-hmm.
But when we do get somebody, say, from an Asian background or from an Afro-Caribbean background,
mm-hmm.
it's like, oh my God, you've got balls doing that, because because not only are you sticking two fingers up at the mainstream crap,
Yeah.
but you're also sort of I wouldn't say rejecting, but you're also moving away from your old cultural background, which for a lot of people is important, and I think it's absolutely amazing. I really do. I used to have I've lost touch with her now, but I had an Asian goth friend called Rabina, and she was absolutely stunning with this natural, thick, long, jet black hair. And when she put her makeup on, she was absolutely stunning. But she used to get the same sort of hassle as I did. But she was getting it from her own culture, because from a religious point of view as well. I mean, I was getting like sort of hassle from the general public, from normal kids, or the mainstream kids, because I looked a bit weird and I didn't quite understand what it was about. But she was getting a lot of grief culturally as well.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think like sort of people of color coming into the goth scene, you've got balls, and I really absolutely admire it. I really do.
You. Oh yeah, a lot of the things people said, you're worshiping the devil. That a lot of Black people are really. I don't think people realize how conservative a lot of Black people are. A lot of us are religious, so that whole. I was just, it's like I felt the same way as I do in the night. It's like, I'm just listening to music. I'm not into worshiping.
Yeah. And I think Edward as well. You probably, coming from Dublin, you probably have been brought up as a Catholic, so there may have been that conflict there.
Oh yeah, I became an atheist at 9.
Oh wow!
Sorry.
I remember the day.
Oh wow! Now that's brave.
Yeah.
Took me 30
it's a long
years.
story. I got hit in the head with a brick. Even I've been in America like since first time I came, I was 15, and then the second time I came, I was 21. I went back to England, and then I wanted to come back to America, and I came back a second time. But when I lived in Luton, which you probably know is like this car factory town.
I know Luton. And around Milton Keynes and Harpenden and St Albans.
And so being a glam rock boy and platforms and long hair, in that environment, it was like 5 of us in the school, and 10 of us in the town. And but my fear at that time was that I was going to have a boring life. That was my biggest fear, because all I saw was boredom and apathy. And so when I was 15, I went to a Catholic school called Cardinal Newman, and they said to me, you're too much of a fucking mess. You need to just go away. So I was 15 when they told me to leave school. And so I got the pleasure of telling them, fuck you too. I'm going to Los Angeles to live. Fuck you in the Catholic school.
Good for you.
And so that's how, but that was just pure chance. I got that opportunity to come to America and make sure I didn't lead a boring life or a gray life. And if it hadn't been punk and goth and death rock and synth punk and industrial, what would I have done? What would I have done? But I regret
that's very, very similar to how I felt at that age in the 80s. Because where I come from, it's the northeast of England, and it's a very tough working class area. Very high unemployment, a lot of it's very, very tough, very poor area. And obviously I wanted to get away from the place. I really did, because I just felt so more creative than the environment around me. So I had to do something, and that's what I did. I went to art college and moved to Leeds. Obviously I didn't move to LA.
So I feel a lot of gratefulness that these movements existed. Because it could have been the 50s when I got here.
Oh no. Yeah, yeah, that not a good time for us.
No.
I do actually find the Gothic subculture, or the majority of people in the Gothic subculture, we're quite tolerant. I think because we've had to put up with so much crap.
Yes,
we've become quite tolerant towards other people.
Right.
And we'll try and not reason with people, but we try and understand them. I mean, obviously you're going to get the knuckleheads that are going to shout abuse at you, but you just ignore that. But yeah, I think generally speaking, we are quite tolerant of others, especially those from different ethnic backgrounds joining the subculture.
And just not just ethnic. I grew up in a Seventh-day Adventist church, very conservative, and I felt stifled too. And I got to college, got in a goth scene, met people from not only different races, met people of different sexual orientations, and we were just all freaks together.
Exactly.
It was us against the normal. So it was very I had a lot of fun in college. Really opened up my world.
I feel like we could probably go for a lot longer, but I do need to keep some kind of constriction on the episode length.
Yeah, so I'm out of wine now. So.
I know, right? Refill.
I really enjoyed this.
This has been absolutely lovely.
Yes, me too.
Yes,
absolute pleasure. Yes. It has been fantastic.
Absolutely.
We could do this again if Daniel wants us to. We can open up another discussion about something else.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'll
knows
put that
where
down.
to find us. Just send us a message.
And that's going to be it for this week. Thank you so much to our guests. I was really honored to have all of you on the show, and it was truly a pleasure to get to hang out for a little while. In 2 weeks, we're going to be back with a new episode where we're going to be talking a lot about death, and we're going to be talking about what it is like to be a goth in a pandemic. And our guest for that episode is going to be Ryan, who is the lead singer for the death rock band Witch Hands. If you enjoyed the show and you want to get more content or just support what we're doing so we can stay online and continue making episodes, head over to patreon.com/Cemetery Confessions. Tiers start at $1, where you can get early access to shows like this one, and then we have other rewards going on from there. So if you want to check it out and see what kind of extra bonus content you can get, that is patreon.com/Cemetery Confessions. We will be back on the 16th, so until then, stay dark.
The preceding program is a member of the Belfry, a network of blogs, podcasts, and videos for the darkly inclined. Go to thebelfry.rip for more information.